I never thought the day would come when my own child, the one I raised with sleepless nights and sacrifices only a mother could understand, would look me straight in the eyes and tell me I was no longer needed. But that's exactly what happened, and it all began with $33 million, an amount of money that didn't just change bank accounts, but changed hearts, minds, and family bonds. My name is Margaret Lewis, and at 69 years old, I believed I had weathered the worst storms life could throw at me. 2 years ago, I buried my husband, Richard, after 44 years of marriage. Together, we raised one daughter, Vanessa. She was my pride, my companion, my reason for pushing through the long days and longer nights after Richard's passing. We weren't wealthy people, but we were comfortable. Richard left us a modest house, some savings, and the kind of memories money could never buy. Vanessa didn't grow up brushing shoulders with the wealthy. She grew up eating my homemade casseroles, wearing outfits I stretched the budget to buy during back-to-school sales, and helping her father in the garage on Sundays. She was never deprived, but we weren't extravagant. I thought that upbringing grounded her. I thought it taught her gratitude. I was wrong. It all changed the afternoon the lawyer called. Richard's estranged brother, an eccentric who hoarded properties, stocks, and shares, had died without leaving any heirs except Vanessa. We hadn't been close to him. In fact, she barely knew the man. But bloodlines are written in law. And just like that, my daughter inherited $33 million. At first, I was as stunned as she was. My little girl, suddenly wealthy beyond either of our imaginations. She squealed into the phone the way she had at 13 when she got her first part in a school play. "Mom, can you believe it?" she said, her voice vibrating with joy. "$33 million! We'll never have to worry about anything again." I laughed with her. I imagined her paying off student loans, buying a comfortable home, maybe starting her own business. I pictured vacations, security, stability. Most of all, I pictured us together, maybe even closer now that money stress was gone. But money doesn't remove stress, it mutates it. By the end of that week, Vanessa was moving into a penthouse downtown. Suddenly, the creaking little house where I had rocked her to sleep and Richard had taught her to ride her bike was quaint and outdated. She redecorated her new place with furniture that cost more than Richard and I had saved in years. When she spoke to me, it was with a clipped brightness, the kind people use when squeezing you between more important tasks. I ignored the signs at first. I cooked in her gleaming new kitchen, feeling slightly out of place with my old recipes beside sparkling marbled counters. I smiled at her friends, though their eyes carried amusement at my worn shoes and thrift store handbag. I told myself Vanessa was finding her way into this new world, and I would be patient. Patience had always been my strength as a mother. Then came the evening that split everything in two. I had spent the day chopping vegetables, preparing the hearty chicken stew her father used to love, determined to hold on to a bit of tradition in her glass-walled paradise. As I set the table, Vanessa walked in, her heels clicking on the polished floor, her silk dress clinging like it belonged in a magazine. She looked at the simmering pot and frowned. "Mom, what's that smell?" she asked, wrinkling her nose. "It's Richard's favorite stew," I said softly, still not used to speaking of him in past tense. "I thought we could share it tonight, family food for our family home." She put down her handbag sharply, the leather thudding again. "Saint Marble, this isn't family food, Mom. This is peasant food. My guests don't want to eat something that looks like brown sludge." Her words cut deeper than she cared to notice, but she wasn't finished. She crossed her arms and delivered the line that will be etched into my memory forever. "In fact, Mom, it's time for you to think about moving out. You don't fit here anymore. You're an extra mouth in a world I've worked hard to step into. You'll be happier somewhere simpler. I'll cover a senior apartment for you. But here, this is my lifestyle now." The room fell silent, except for the soft bubbling of stew. I looked at her, the little girl who once clutched my hand crossing streets, who cried into my chest when she skinned her knee. And all I saw was a stranger draped in silk, a mask carved from greed. "You're throwing me out?" I whispered. She avoided my gaze, busying herself with her phone. "Let's not be dramatic. I'm setting you up with independence. You'll love it. Think of it as your own place, finally." I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I packed my small suitcase the next morning. I kissed the locket with Richard's photo, slipped it into my pocket, and closed the door on the penthouse before she could see the tears staining my blouse. 3 days later, I sat in a little studio flat in the older part of town, staring at beige walls that smelled faintly of mildew, wondering how 44 years of love and labor had ended with eviction from my only daughter. I thought loneliness had reached its peak. But then the phone rang. It was past midnight. My hands trembled as I picked up, expecting perhaps the building manager or a wrong number. Instead, Vanessa's voice crackled through, high-pitched and breathless, stripped of the smooth confidence she had worn like armor. "Mom," she gasped, "I need you, please. I didn't know where else to call." I nearly dropped the phone. The daughter who had thrown me out like trash, who told me I no longer belonged, begging for help. I steadied my voice. "What's happened, Vanessa?" Silence. Then a sob. The kind of sob that reminded me of her childhood, when monsters under the bed terrified her and only my arms could chase them away. "Mom, everything's falling apart." Her sobs on the other end of the phone made my chest tighten. It didn't matter that she had humiliated me, that she had called me an extra mouth. The moment I heard her crying, the mother in me wanted to wrap her up and make it all go away. Old instincts rarely die, no matter how wounded the heart. But I remembered the way her eyes had been cold as she offered to send me off like a library book returned after years of being borrowed. I steadied my voice, keeping it calm, though my heart raced. "Tell me what's wrong, Vanessa." There was a long pause before she said, "They tricked me, Mom. They took everything. The money is gone. Please, I don't know what to do. I don't trust anyone. I only trust you." The irony nearly made me laugh. 3 days ago, she told me I didn't belong in her world. Now, she was pulling me back into it, broken, desperate, begging. Still, I knew better than to gloat. Instead, I asked gently, "Start from the beginning. What happened?" Through gasps and half-formed sentences, she explained. After inheriting the $33 million, she had been advised by Kevin, her husband, the man I never truly trusted, to invest it with his financial partners. "It'll grow. You'll be set for life," he told her. Vanessa, drunk on luxury and dazzled by his confidence, signed papers she didn't fully read. She transferred nearly every cent into accounts controlled by him and his circle. And then, 2 nights ago, she overheard him on the phone. Kevin wasn't speaking about investment growth. He was bragging about finally being free from me, about moving everything offshore with his new partner. When Vanessa confronted him, he laughed in her face, called her naive, told her money changes. People, especially men who find women with inheritances. He packed a suitcase the next morning and disappeared. Now Vanessa was left, with an empty condo, empty accounts, and $33 million vanished into thin air. "Mom, I can't pay the bills. The doorman is already asking questions about late fees. She choked on tears. "I don't have anyone else." I closed my eyes, clutching the phone tighter. $33 million gone in 3 days. My daughter, who had looked down on homemade stew as peasant food, suddenly didn't know how to put together her next meal. "And now you want my help," I said softly. "Yes, Mom." Her voice cracked with desperation. "Please. I was wrong. I was so wrong. I should never have said those things to you. I thought I was in control. I thought I didn't need anyone. But I need you. Please come." I sat silently in my small studio. The wallpaper was peeling, the radiator creaked, and yet, in that moment, I felt stronger than I had in years. Richard's photo rested on the nightstand beside me, his familiar smile reminding me of dignity, pride, self-respect. He would have told me to pause, not to run blindly, just because her tears struck my heart. "Vanessa," I said firmly, "I will come. But understand this. You threw me away when life was golden. You don't call me back only when it's ashes unless you are prepared to listen. Do you hear me?" "Yes, Mom. I'll listen. Just don't leave me alone." I arrived at the penthouse the next morning. The grand building looked like a shining palace. But when the elevator doors opened to Vanessa's floor, I found her curled up on the couch, mascara streaked across her face, surrounded by unopened delivery boxes she no longer had money to pay for. "Mom," she sobbed, running to me like a child again, collapsing into my arms. My heart cracked at the feel of her trembling. For a moment, I let her cry, stroking her hair the way I used to when nightmares woke her at age 5. But then, stepping back, I forced myself to stay steady. "Sit," I told her, my voice more commanding than it had ever been. "Tell me everything. Show me the papers, every document you signed. We are not fixing your life with tears. We are fixing it with truth." Shame burned on her cheeks, but she obeyed. She pulled out a folder stuffed with forms, receipts, contracts full of legal jargon. I spread them across the marble coffee table, my practicality honed from years of balancing family bills on a teacher's salary now becoming sharper than ever. One thin line under authorized control was all I needed to see. Kevin had transferred ownership of 90% of the assets into his name under the guise of portfolio consolidation. At 28 years old, Vanessa had signed away power to a man who had now disappeared. "Mom, can we get it back?" she whispered, fear in her eyes. I looked up at her, my daughter, who had been dazzled by money, who had placed wealth above blood. She needed to understand. Money can vanish, respect cannot. "Maybe," I said calmly, "but more important is that you learn why you lost it. You trusted the wrong person, and you underestimated the right one." Her lip trembled. "You?" "Yes, me. The mother you dismissed as an extra mouth. The woman who lived without millions but still fed you, clothed you, and gave you a home." She dropped her face in her hands. "I was horrible. Selfish," I corrected. "Entitled. But I'm still here, aren't I?" For the next several hours, I called lawyers, some of whom still remembered Richard and respected his name. They spoke of frozen accounts, potential fraud charges, avenues of reclaiming funds. Each phone call stitched a bit of strength back into my spine. As Vanessa listened, wide-eyed, I caught flickers of the little girl who used to stand at my kitchen counter as I sorted bills, asking the difference between debit and credit. By evening, we had a plan. Kevin had made errors in his greed, and leaving accounts traceable. With legal filings, there was hope of clawing back millions, but whether $1 or $33 million, the larger truth, hung in the air. Money had almost destroyed us. That night, as Vanessa made tea with shaky hands, she whispered, "Mom, why are you helping me after what I did?" I looked at her, this woman who was still my child, and said, "Because sometimes the lesson only sticks when you feel the pain. And because strength isn't throwing people away, it's seeing them at their weakest and helping them stand, even if they once pushed you down." She wept again, softer this time, not from money lost, but from something deeper. Realization. And in my heart, I knew the real inheritance wasn't $33 million. It was the dignity I still held, the values Richard and I had built. Vanessa would either learn them now or lose far more than money ever could. The next morning, I was up before dawn. Age might have slowed my bones, but not my resolve. I spread every paper across the tiny kitchen table of her sprawling penthouse. Coffee steamed beside me, though my stomach churned too much to drink it. Vanessa shuffled out of the bedroom wearing one of those silk robes she'd bought since wealth had touched her life. But now, without confidence padding her shoulders, silk looked as thin as tissue. "Mom," she croaked, her voice rough from crying, "do you really think we can stop him?" I didn't look up immediately. I wanted her to sit in the weight of silence a moment, to feel that this wasn't about magic solutions, but about consequences. Finally, I met her eyes. "Kevin may think he's clever, but greed always leaves fingerprints. We'll follow them." She nodded slowly, a child once more in this grand cage of glass. By noon, I was sitting in a law office downtown. Vanessa sat beside me, twisting her hands, while across the massive oak desk, a lawyer named Robert Stone tapped his pen rhythmically as he scanned the contracts. His brow furrowed. "Classic fraudulent inducement," he muttered. Your son-in-law. I've presented these papers as routine investment agreements, but he concealed material facts. That gives us grounds. Grounds for what? Vanessa's voice was thin. For petitioning the court to freeze anything still tied to his name, Stone said, and for pressing charges. The complication is offshore accounts. If he moved money out of this country, recovery becomes harder, but not impossible. I leaned forward. So we have a chance? The lawyer looked at me, not at Vanessa. Perhaps he sensed who the real backbone in the room was. Yes, but you'll need evidence. Recordings, communications, anything showing intent. If we can prove he planned to defraud her, the authorities will pursue it aggressively. Vanessa whispered, but he erased his emails before he left. He changed passwords. Stone turned to me. Sometimes people are sloppy. Check devices, back up hard drives. I'd recommend hiring a forensic accountant. We left the office with more questions than answers, but I felt a fire in my chest I hadn't felt for years. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about proving the truth, about showing my daughter who her real protector was. Not silk suits, not charming men, a mother with nothing left to lose. That evening, while Vanessa sulked on the couch, I began searching. I rifled through drawers Kevin had left behind. At the bottom of his desk, I found a plain black notebook. Inside were scribbles, dates, names, account numbers carelessly jotted. Sloppy indeed. Vanessa, I called, come here. She padded in reluctantly. What is it? I flipped the notebook to her. Your husband wasn't as clever as he thought. Her eyes widened. Mom, are those bank account numbers, transactions, codes? He left a trail even a child could follow. We spent hours cross-referencing dates with transfers in her statements. Each line was a nail in his coffin. Offshore accounts. Cayman, Islands, Luxembourg. His greed wanted to strut too loudly. I snapped photos of every page. Tomorrow, we take this to Mr. Stone, I said firmly. Vanessa reached for my hand. Mom, thank you. Her gratitude wobbled. I tightened my grip only briefly, then pulled away. Don't thank me yet. You still don't understand what matters most. Sleep was restless that night. Richard's locket felt heavy on my chest, as if he too carried the weight of these choices. I remembered how he had always warned Vanessa about quick fixes, about trusting appearances. Strong roots, not shiny leaves, he used to say. She'd laughed at his metaphors. Now she was crying among the broken branches. The following morning we returned to Stone with the notebook and the photos. His eyes lit up. Excellent. This is exactly the trail I hoped for. With this, I can request emergency orders to freeze every account Kevin touched. He may have wired funds overseas, but the paper trail remains here. He's not free yet. Vanessa exhaled, relief spilling across her face, but Stone raised a cautioning hand. Don't celebrate too soon. Men like this panic when cornered. Expect retaliation. He may try to disparage you, claim you consented. We'll need to move quickly. So we did. For days, I became the engine fueling that case. Vanessa sat slumped or paced anxiously, while I gathered timelines, drafted statements, organized photos. Lawyers and investigators called me, not her. I answered each with clarity. Perhaps for the first time in her life, my daughter was learning the difference between wealth and wisdom. One night, as I reorganized the piles of evidence, Vanessa whispered, I don't deserve you. I didn't respond immediately. The part of me, still aching from her betrayal, wanted to agree. Finally, I sighed. Maybe not. But I deserve to be true to myself. And that means fighting for family even when it breaks my heart. She burst into tears again. But this time, they weren't tears of a spoiled woman. They were tears of remorse. And for the first time in days, I felt a flick and of hope. A week passed in this rhythm of evidence and hearings. The court granted temporary injunctions. Kevin's accounts froze like rivers turned to ice. But then came the call we dreaded. Mrs. Lewis, Stone's voice was urgent. We have reason to believe Kevin is trying to liquidate assets hidden under shell companies. We need you both in court tomorrow. Be prepared to testify. The next morning, we walked into the courthouse. Vanessa clung to my arm like a frightened child. Reporters gathered outside like vultures, shouting questions. Flashbulbs flickered. 33 million disappearing tends to attract attention. Inside, the air was tense, thick with polished wood and legal jargon. And there he was, Kevin, dressed immaculately in a suit, smugness dripping from his smile. He winked at Vanessa like she was still under his spell. She shrank beside me, but I lifted my chin, meeting his gaze unwavering. He leaned to his lawyer, whispering. Papers rustled. Words like consent and marital property drifted across the aisle. He was planning to blame her, to paint himself as the dutiful husband carrying the financial burden. When it was my turn to speak, I stood tall. My voice carried every ounce of the strength I had honed across decades of sacrifice and quiet endurance. My daughter entrusted her husband, I began. She believed partnership meant honesty. Instead, he exploited trust, tricked her into financial ruin, and planned to abandon her. But greed leaves shadows, and we have them here in black ink. I held up the photos of the notebook. Kevin's attorney objected, sputtered, but the judge leaned forward, intrigued. Engines of justice had finally begun to turn. As we left that courtroom later, the outcome not yet sealed, but tides shifting, Vanessa grasped my hand. "Mom, you saved me." I looked into her eyes, raw with fear and something new. Respect. "No, Vanessa. I said quietly. "I'm teaching you how to save yourself. This is only the beginning." The courthouse became our second home in those weeks that followed. Every morning, Vanessa and I walked up those steps together, her heels clicking nervously beside the slower shuffle of my worn shoes. She wore muted suits now, not the extravagant silks she had flaunted weeks ago. She wanted to appear humble, contrite. I, on the other hand, wore the same navy dress with Richard's pearls at my neck. It wasn't wealth that gave me strength. It was memory. It was love. It was survival. Kevin, meanwhile, strutted into court each day as if the building itself had been raised to showcase him. Expensive ties, sleek hair, and an aura of arrogance so thick it almost clung to our clothes. He laughed with his lawyer, projected confidence, oozed charm. Vanessa shrank every time her eyes met his, the old spell still glinting like glass shards. But I never looked away. Predators tolerate many things. Steady eyes unsettle them most. On the third day of hearings, Kevin took the stand. His lawyer guided him to speak of himself as the responsible husband who had shouldered Vanessa's inexperience with finances. "My wife inherited an enormous sum she didn't know how to manage," he declared, his voice full of mock concern. "Out of love, I stepped in to ensure our future security. It was stressful, but I accepted that burden. She presumed paperwork was routine, and it was. There was no fraud, just a misunderstanding between spouses." A misunderstanding. He said it as though $33 million were a set of dirty dishes left in the sink. Vanessa squeezed my hand under the table so tightly I thought bones might crack. Her face reddened with humiliation, but I looked forward, unflinching. The judge shifted in his seat, unimpressed. "And where are these funds now, Mr. Riley?" Kevin smiled faintly. "Invested. Overseas opportunities. They fluctuate, but are secured for growth." That was when Robert Stone stood. "Your Honor, permission to present exhibits. Itzy." The bailiff delivered our photos, Kevin's careless notebook, his scribbled account numbers, the dates of transfers. Stone's voice rang out with clarity. "This, Your Honor, is not the work of a gentleman investing responsibly for his wife. This is a roadmap of deceit, transfers into private shell corporations, movements offshore. And let me underscore, all of this happened within 72 hours of my client inheriting her fortune." Kevin's lawyer fumbled with objections, but the judge overruled. He studied the pages, his brow tightening. Kevin adjusted his tie, the smile slipping just slightly. The tide had shifted. That evening, Vanessa and I sat in her now quiet kitchen, sipping weak tea. No servants, no catered trays, no mountains of delivered boxes cluttered the space anymore. Just us, silence, and the faint hum of the refrigerator. "Mom," she whispered, staring into her mug. "I don't deserve you. I should have defended you when I had everything. Instead, I threw you aside like you were in the way." Her voice broke. "How could I ever make that right?" I laid a hand on hers. "You don't make it right with apologies. You make it right with change. Respect isn't words, it's how you live after." That night, I slept for the first time without restless tossing. My daughter was seeing clearly now, maybe for the first time, but Kevin wasn't finished. The following week, his lawyer filed fresh motions, claiming Vanessa had been complicit, that she had agreed to consolidate assets and spend lavishly, that she was merely regretting the consequences. They painted her as spoiled, irresponsible, eager to blame a husband who tried to control her excess. I watched Vanessa tremble as those papers were read aloud. Shame pooled on her cheeks. All eyes in the courtroom turned toward us as if to say, "Is this true?" That was when I pushed my chair back, deliberately, loudly, and stood. "Your Honor," I asked, "may I address the court as a witness?" The judge raised his brow, but nodded. I walked slowly to the stand, my steps unhurried, even as every gaze in the room pierced my back. I took the oath, sat, and looked directly at the judge. "My name is Margaret Lewis. I am the mother of Vanessa. I was present for that so-called excessive spending. I watched my daughter buy gowns, decorate her home, play hostess as if she belonged in high circles. And yes, she was dazzled, careless perhaps, but complicit in fraud?" I turned, fixing Kevin with the stern force of years of maternal authority. "No. She was used, manipulated by a man who told her love meant trust, who made himself into her anchor only to drag her under. That man studied her vulnerabilities and exploited them for greed. That isn't a misunderstanding. That's betrayal written in ink and stolen money." Gasps echoed faintly in the chamber. Kevin smirked, but it was thin now, desperate at its edges. The judge leaned forward. "Mrs. Lewis, are you suggesting Mr. Riley deliberately planned this scheme before your daughter inherited?" "Yes, Your Honor. I am saying he married her with that intention. My late husband and I never trusted him. He courted her with charm, but charm without love is a weapon. He knew about the uncle's wealth long before Vanessa did. He made sure he was standing beside her when lightning struck." Silence stretched long after my final words. Then the judge nodded slowly. "Duly noted." We stepped out of court that afternoon into a frenzy of reporters. Cameras flashed, microphones shoved into faces. Questions swirled like smoke. Betrayal, millions, fraud. I tugged Vanessa close. "Say nothing," I whispered. "Let the truth be louder than gossip." That evening she sat on the floor with me, our backs against the couch she had once bragged cost $15,000. Now it just felt like fabric. "Mom," she said quietly, "if they recover some of the money, I want you to have part of it. You deserve more than a studio with peeling wallpaper." I shook my head firmly. "It's yours, Vanessa. You will need it for stability." "But no, what I need is your respect. That is more valuable to me than millions ever could be." For once, she didn't argue. Her eyes brimmed, and she leaned her head on my shoulder. It felt like the child I remembered had returned, even if faintly. The hearings dragged on another week. Every shred of Kevin's arrogance peeled away. His travel records betrayed him. His offshore wires tightened the noose. Lawyers intercepted communications between him and his so-called partner abroad. Slowly, surely, the mountain of greed he had built crumbled stone by stone. On the final day, the judge spoke with deliberate weight. "This court finds sufficient evidence of fraudulent intent. Accounts tied to Mr. Riley are hereby frozen pending restitution proceedings. Criminal investigation will follow." Kevin's face, once smug enough to rule kingdoms, paled like chalk. He glanced at Vanessa with venom, then at me, eyes full of the knowledge that the woman he dismissed as irrelevant had undone him. When the gavel struck, Vanessa clutched my hand so tightly I nearly cried out. She whispered, "Mom, he can't hurt us anymore." But I said nothing, because I knew something she hadn't yet realized. Villains don't quit easily. They corner, they lash. And Kevin still had venom left. As we walked out of the courthouse, the winter sun sharp on our faces, I whispered to Richard in my heart, "She's learning, love. Our girl is learning." And deep inside, I also whispered a vow. I would not let this lesson go unfinished. We thought we had finally reached an ending when the judge's gavel struck, declaring Kevin's accounts frozen. Vanessa even smiled faintly as we stepped outside the courthouse, her breath rising in clouds against the chill, her hand clutching mine for warmth and reassurance. As reporters shouted our names, but for the first time in weeks, she looked lighter. For a single fragile moment, I almost believed that the nightmare was over. But Kevin wasn't the type to surrender gracefully. The first sign came 2 days later. I left Vanessa sleeping in her room while I went down to the lobby to fetch the morning mail. There, tucked between utility bills and credit notices, was a thick envelope marked with red capital letters. Eviction notice. The condo association, it seemed, had received complaints of disrupted payments and breach of owner integrity. I read the paper twice, numb with disbelief. Kevin's signature was printed neatly under the submitted complaint, though he had no legal claim to this property anymore. He was still pulling strings, reaching from the shadows. When I showed Vanessa, she collapsed against the counter. "He won't stop, Mom. Even if he can't touch the money, he'll ruin everything else." Her fear seeped into me, but I masked it with steel. "Then we fight again. He will push, and we will push back harder." We took the notice straight to Robert Stone's office. He skimmed it, shaking his head in disgust. "Intimidation tactics. He wants you rattled. Don't give him that satisfaction. I'll file contempt charges immediately." Despite Robert's confidence, unease clung like smoke. That evening, I was washing dishes when I noticed a black car idling near the entrance to the building. The same car returned the next 3 nights, headlights on, engine purring, never stepping away. Every time I peeked from the curtains, my heart thudded heavier. "Mom, what if it's Kevin's partner? What if he sends someone?" Vanessa whispered one night, her eyes wide with dread. I wrapped her in my arms. "Listen to me. They may have money and threats, but we have truth and time. Fear is what they want. We will not live feeding it." Yet I couldn't ignore the shadows. The next morning, I called an old friend from Richard's days in city service. George had worked security for years and never quite retired. 2 hours later, a tall frame with weather-lined features stood in our doorway. "You need a second pair of eyes," he said simply, stepping inside with his old detective's calm. From that day forward, the black car disappeared, but the unease remained. Weeks blurred. Legal hearings piled higher. Kevin's lawyer filed endless petitions, each one weaker than the last, but exhausting nonetheless. Vanessa grew restless, pacing the condo. She talked endlessly of what she would do if she ever got the money back, help victims of fraud, create an organization in her uncle's name. But beneath the hopeful words was shame, rubbing like grit in her spirit. One night, she sat across from me at the table, eyes red. "Mom, I keep asking myself, why did I throw you out? Why did I look at you and think you were an inconvenience?" I laid down my tea and held her gaze. Because money is a mirror. It shows you what's already inside. And when it showed you greed, you chose it. But a mirror can also be smashed. That's what you're doing now. Her face crumpled. "I don't know if you can ever forgive me." Forgiveness is a complicated word. I sighed. "I may never forget, but if you keep walking this road with respect, I will always walk beside you." It was the truth. Then came the day everything tipped. Robert Stone called with urgency in his voice. "Mrs. Lewis, Vanessa, come to the office, now." We arrived to find him spreading documents across his desk. "Kevin's been caught, not just with your money. He's implicated in a larger fraud web. Federal investigators are involved. That notebook you found? He tapped it for emphasis. It helped tie him to other cases. The FBI will be moving. Vanessa gasped. The FBI? Yes. That means restitution is likely. Not all 33 million perhaps, but a significant percentage. And it means Kevin may be trading his bravado for prison walls. I closed my eyes, an immense tide of relief washing over me. Richard, if only you could see this. But before relief could fully sink in, the receptionist knocked, pale. There's a man in the lobby asking for Margaret Lewis. I frowned. George had accompanied us but was waiting downstairs already. Who else could be looking for me? When I entered the lobby, cold air rushed against my cheeks as the glass doors closed. A man stood there, unfamiliar and yet tethered to Kevin's world. His suit was expensive, but his smile was thin as ice. Mrs. Lewis, he said softly, consider this a courtesy. Kevin has friends who don't like meddling. Drop the case, or regret it. For a split second, my knees weakened. The implied threat coiled sharp. But then something older, deeper filled me. Maternal ferocity. I straightened. You tell Kevin's friends, I said calmly, that I buried a husband. I've been betrayed by my only child, and yet I'm still standing. Men with ugly suits don't frighten me. If they were smart, they'd stay far away. The man narrowed his eyes, then slid quietly out into the street. George appeared from the side entrance moments later, alert. Who was that? Just a ghost, I muttered, though fire still trembled in my veins. That night, I thought about fear, how it simmers, how it can bend spines, but also how standing unshaken can sometimes end it quicker than fists. I'd spent too many years quiet, polite, accommodating. Never again. The weeks that followed became a blur of hearings, deposits, paperwork. Until finally, one crisp morning, Robert called with a smile in his voice. Congratulations. The courts have ruled. Partial restitution approved. $17 million is being returned to Vanessa immediately, with more pending investigation. Vanessa collapsed into tears, clutching me so hard I almost toppled. Mom, $17 million, she gasped. I stroked her hair gently. It isn't 33, but maybe losing some is what's teaching you value. She nodded through tears. I don't care. I just care to, had I didn't lose you. That day we cooked, truly cooked, for the first time in her gleaming kitchen. Stew, the very same recipe she once called peasant food. She laughed weakly through tears, telling me it smelled like childhood. When she sipped the broth, her shoulders relaxed, and for a fleeting second, I glimpsed the girl who had once danced in mismatched socks in Richard's arms. But Kevin's shadow still lingered. He was arrested weeks later, paraded before flashing cameras. Fraud, money laundering, conspiracy. Yet even as he was led away, he looked over his shoulder at us, his smile crooked. A silent promise that battles rarely end cleanly. I squeezed Vanessa's hand. He's gone. But the lesson stays. And so do I. That night, as the city lights flickered against the windows, Vanessa sat beside me on the couch, her head heavy against my shoulder. You saved me, Mom. You always save me. No, I whispered. This time, I only showed you the map. You had to walk back yourself. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, echoes of justice chasing greed through the night. And I knew, deep in my bones, that the 44 years I'd spent loving and sacrificing had not been wasted, not even when betrayal cut me deepest. Because even through pain, lessons root deeply. Even through loss, respect can blossom. Vanessa was learning, and I was proud, at last, to stand not as a discarded mother, but as a woman who refused to disappear. For the first time in weeks, the corners of Vanessa's mouth lifted into something that resembled peace. It wasn't joy, not yet, but relief, that fragile kind of calm you feel when the fever breaks, though the illness has not quite gone. We had weathered the storm, or at least enough of it, to breathe again. The check confirming restitution arrived by courier 2 days later, sealed in a heavy envelope with official stamps. Vanessa cradled it in her hat, hence the way she Used to cradle birthday gifts as a little girl. Her eyes shimmered with disbelief. 17 million, she whispered. It doesn't even seem real. It's real enough, I said softly, setting 2 mugs of tea on the table. But money isn't what's real, Vanessa. It comes and goes. What matters is what you carry in your heart when it does. She pressed her lips together, nodding. For once, she didn't argue, didn't roll her eyes. She just squeezed my hand, quietly acknowledging the truth that had cost so much to learn. In the days that followed, life began to settle in new rhythms. Vanessa sold the penthouse that carried too many ghosts. She bought a modest townhouse instead, insisting I move in with her. Not as a burden, she clarified quickly, almost desperately. As family, where you always belonged. I studied her face carefully, searching for condescension, but found only sincerity. I agreed, though not because I needed the comfort. I agreed because she needed the chance to show me she had changed. Our first week in that townhouse was simple. I cooked pasta. She learned how to scrub pans without chipping her manicure. We unpacked boxes together, laughing occasionally when we found trinkets from her childhood. Drawings with crooked houses and stick figures labeled Mommy plus Daddy plus me. She flushed each time, embarrassed at the softness she had buried for years, but I treasured those rediscoveries. Still, beneath our laughter lay a cautiousness. We circled each other like survivors tiptoeing through ruins, careful not to trigger hidden landmines. She still apologized too often. I still measured her promises against the shadow of betrayal. Healing is not quick. It is made of many tiny stitches. One night, after hours of sorting photos, Vanessa set aside a frame of Richard holding her high on his shoulders. She stared at it a long while before whispering, "He'd be so met of me." I placed my hand on the photo. He'd be hurt, yes, but he'd want you to rise, not wallow. Shame keeps you chained. Growth breaks them. She burst into tears again, but softer now, cleansing. She leaned against me and murmured, "I want to be better, not because of the money, not because I lost it, but because I can finally see how much I nearly lost with you. That's worth more than any check." I held her close, my heart trembling. For the first time in months, I truly believed her. But Kevin's specter still haunted the edges of our days. Newspapers carried his trial announcements, photos of him being led in handcuffs, smug grin replaced by grim defiance. The FBI built their case wider, linking him to fraud schemes stretching beyond Vanessa's inheritance. He faced years behind bars, but he fought tooth and claw. Subpoenas flew across states. Threats resurfaced from people who had once profited from his scams. One afternoon, we returned home to find a brick on the doorstep wrapped with newspaper scribbled in bold marker. "You'll regret this." Vanessa shrieked, hands clutching at me in terror. I lifted the brick calmly, tossed the paper into the trash, and placed the heavy stone in the garden. "Fear feeds them," I told her firmly, "so we feed trust instead." But inside, I locked the doors twice that night and prayed to Richard for strength. Weeks later, Kevin accepted a plea deal. 17 charges, 14 years federal sentence. Vanessa sat stunned when we heard the news. "He's going to prison," she murmured. 14 years. I just nodded. Justice doesn't always come dressed in celebration. Sometimes it comes quietly, like a gavel echoing down corridors, reshaping the remainder of a life. The day his sentence was announced, Vanessa and I lit candles in the townhouse. She cooked a stew, my recipe, though it was watery and slightly too salty. Still, when she set the bowls on the table, her eyes searched mine, almost childlike, waiting for approval. "It's perfect," I said, and watched her face bloom like the shy smile of a girl long lost. Months passed. Seasons turned. The townhouse filled with new life, not extravagant parties or gilded ornaments, but simple warmth. Vanessa took on volunteer work, helping others avoid scams, speaking quietly about her own mistakes when asked. She insisted on donating part of what remained to programs for women rebuilding after financial abuse. She was still wealthy, yes, but now her wealth walked slower, humbler. One evening, she came home with an envelope clutched to her chest. "Mom," she said, trembling, "I've set up something. A trust." "A trust?" Tears rimmed her eyes. "For you. For the rest of your life. You'll never worry again. You sacrificed everything. Years, sleep, clothes, joy, to raise me. I threw you away, and you still saved me. Please, let me repay you." I stared at her long and hard, then slowly nodded. Not because I wanted her money. I had never cared for that. But because allowing her to care for me was part of her path to redemption. She needed to give back, to honor roots she once scorned. She hugged me, sobbing. "I promise, Mom, I'll never make you feel unwanted again." There are no words in the English language to describe the quiet relief of a mother hearing those words from the child who once broke her. At night, sometimes I still wake with the memory of the day she called me an extra mouth. That sting may never fully fade. But in the mornings, I drink tea in the bright kitchen of our shared home and remind myself, even the most painful lessons can flower into change. Richard would have smiled seeing his daughter giggle as she burned pancakes, watching me scold her lightly for using too much laundry detergent. We didn't get 33 million back. We got something harder, rarer, richer. We got us. And for me, that is justice more powerful than any bank balance. Winter returned before we realized it. Snow lined the windowsills of the townhouse, frosting the glass until the street outside glowed dimly under the lamps. Vanessa and I sat near the fireplace, sorting Christmas ornaments. She lifted a cracked ceramic angel, the very same one she once dismissed as cheap. She traced the fracture with her thumb, eyes watery. "Mom," she whispered, "I can't believe I ever thought these things didn't matter. They were pieces of my childhood, pieces of you." I smiled softly. Ornaments are symbols, Vanessa. What they represent is what matters. Love, memory, family. Money can buy gold, but it can't buy meaning. She set it gently on the mantel, as though it were treasure. And in that moment, I saw how far she had come. But fate wasn't finished with us. Not yet. 3 nights before Christmas, long after we had cozied into bed, the phone rang again. My heart leapt, fearing another late-night storm. Vanessa picked it up first. I listened as her voice faltered. "What? No, that's not... How?" She dropped the handset as though it burned. "Mom," she cried, "the accounts. Someone's draining them again." I hurried over. On the receiver, Robert Stone's voice carried urgency. "Kevin's partners filed motions abroad. They're trying to sabotage restitution, claiming joint control. If the court believes them, part of the 17 million could vanish." Vanessa collapsed against the couch. "I can't do this again. I can't, Mom." I clasped her trembling hands. "Yes, you can. And you will. Because this time, you won't walk blind. You'll fight with open eyes." Her breath stuttered, but slowly, her spine straightened. The days leading to Christmas became a whirlwind of emergency hearings. Vanessa was called to testify again, this time against faceless corporations hiding behind numbered accounts. She trembled walking up the stand, glancing desperately at me. I nodded firmly, whispering the words, "Richard had once told me, strong roots, not shiny leaves." She took a deep breath, then spoke, clear, strong, honest. She described Kevin's manipulation, his arrogance, her naivete, her mistakes. She admitted what she had done wrong without excuses, then laid bare the truth of how he had used her. For the first time, her words weren't guided by shame or denial. They were guided by dignity. When she stepped down, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom gallery. Even Robert Stone whispered, "She's growing, Margaret." That evening, she clutched me tightly in the darkened townhouse. "Did I sound strong?" she asked, her voice fragile again once the walls of bravery fell. "You sounded like my daughter," I answered softly. The ruling came. Christmas Eve. Restitution confirmed. The 17 million remained safe. Additional claims were dismissed. Justice, firm and final. We lit candles that night, cooking my cinnamon rolls that had always marked Christmas morning since her childhood. As the sweet scent filled the home, Vanessa leaned against the kitchen doorway with tears sliding down her cheeks. "Remember the night I told you stew was peasant food?" she asked, with a weak laugh. "I remember," I said. "I still hear that scene in my head, and every time it kills me inside. I don't deserve these cinnamon rolls. I don't deserve this tea. I don't deserve you." I set the dough aside, walked over, and cupped her face in my hands. "Listen to me. Guilt is a prison of its own. You don't buy forgiveness with money or apologies. You earn it by never again forgetting what's important. If you can do that, you deserve everything." She sobbed, gripping me as tightly as the child who once clung after nightmares. "I'll never forget again, Mom. I swear it." Christmas morning dawned bright with snowfall. We sat at the table biting into warm rolls, and for the first time in years, laughter filled the dining room. No catered staff, no towering champagne glasses or designer china. Just us, the scent of sugar and cinnamon and love thawing out after a cruel winter. After breakfast, Vanessa disappeared for a moment, then returned carrying a long wrapped box. She set it in front of me, her eyes shining. "What's this?" I asked, startled. "Open it." Inside lay an easel, brushes, and paints. The tools I had put aside decades ago, when Richard, Vanessa, and responsibility pulled me away from my own passions. I hadn't painted in years. "I remember you loved art," she said softly. "I want you to have it again. For you, not for me. For the dreams you gave up so I could chase mine." My chest tightened, and for once, words failed me. So instead, I hugged her, holding tighter than any gift box could contain. That evening, as snow fell steady beyond the window, I opened the canvas and painted for the first time since my 20s. My strokes wobbled, unsure. But slowly, shapes emerged. A small house, a tall tree, and two figures holding hands beneath its shade. Richard, standing with me. Vanessa at my side. All of us together in a way reality no longer allowed, but memory did. The following months rolled gently. Vanessa met with financial counselors, set up foundations to support families scammed by fraud. She invited me to speak alongside her at one event. Standing on that stage, I looked at rows of young women listening with wide eyes as Vanessa told them, "Don't ever let money blind you to who truly loves you." She gestured towards me. "I nearly lost my mother because of greed. I nearly lost myself. But she never gave up on me, and that's why I'm standing here." Applause thundered. My hands shook, but my heart soared. Backstage, she hugged me fiercely. "I hope I make you proud," she whispered. "You do," I said honestly. "Not for the money you regained, for the lesson you learned." Time passed. The case against Kevin faded into history, his name appearing in newspapers only when sentencing updates scrolled across. Pages people barely glanced at. He became a ghost, chained by his own greed. Vanessa, meanwhile, rose from his ashes like a phoenix she had no idea she could be. One spring afternoon, she sat across from me in the garden, sipping lemonade. She studied me a long time before saying, "You know, 3 days after I got that inheritance, I threw you out. And 3 days later, I begged for your help. That's who I was then. Arrogant one moment, desperate the next. But you never abandoned me. Why?" I met her gaze, steady. Because blood may not always mean family, but family means never letting go, even when you're shoved away. Because I remembered the child you were, and I believed, faintly, desperately, that she still lived inside you. And I was right. She covered my hand with hers, tears blurring her vision. "I love you, Mom." Finally, after all the storms, I believed her. That night, I painted again. This time, not Richard, not grief. I painted myself. A woman older, scarred by betrayal, yet standing tall, a brush in her hand, face lifted to the sky. Beside me, faint outlines of family regained, love rekindled, trust reborn. When I stepped back and studied the canvas, emotion overflowed. This painting was my proof. Kevin had stolen millions, yes, but he didn't win. We rebuilt ourselves stronger than before. Sometimes the best revenge isn't prison sentences, frozen accounts, or legal victories. Sometimes the best revenge is becoming everything they thought they had destroyed. As I drifted to sleep that evening, Vanessa whispered from across the hall, "Good night, Mom." And for the first time in months, the words didn't sound obligatory. They sounded like home. Spring turned to summer, and the townhouse slowly filled with life again. Not extravagant parties or glittering displays like Vanessa once dreamed, but quieter, warmer moments. A vase of sunflowers on the kitchen table, chalk drawings by neighborhood children on the sidewalk, cups of tea shared at dusk while crickets sang in the growing dark. One hot afternoon, as we sat outside in the porch sipping lemonade, Vanessa looked out at the street, her brows furrowed. "It feels like another lifetime," she murmured. "When I lived in that penthouse, I thought I was untouchable. I thought money meant freedom. But all it did was chain me tighter to greed and to Kevin." I studied her profile. The harsh edges I had once seen in her expression, the coldness when she told me I was an extra mouth, had faded. Her face looked softer now, more open. Time, loss, and truth had done their quiet work. "You've grown," I said simply. She turned, tears glistening. "Because of you. If you had shut that door on me the way I shut it on you, I don't know if I'd even be alive right now. I was drowning. You were the only one who threw me a rope." I shook my head gently. "No, sweetheart. I only pointed to the rope. You had to grip it yourself." Silence hung between us, broken only by the rustle of leaves. Then she asked a question that pierced deeper than I expected. "Did you ever stop loving me, Mom? Even when I threw you away?" My throat tightened, but my answer came steady. "I hated your choices, Vanessa. They cut me to my core. But love is wrapped too deep inside a mother to be stolen by anger. Even buried under hurt, it was still there. That's why, when you called, I answered. That's why I came." Her tears fell freely. She leaned into me, her head resting on my shoulder, trembling like she had on the night she begged for help. Except now, it wasn't fear shaking her, but gratitude. Later that evening, she surprised me with another gift. In the guest bedroom, my room, she had set up a small studio corner, easel, brushes, organized jars of paint, and a stool cushioned in soft fabric. She'd framed my first awkward painting from months ago, The House Beneath the Tree, Richard's figure beside us, and hung it proudly on the wall. "It's beautiful," I whispered, my fingers grazing the frame. "It's a reminder," she said softly, "of how far we've come, and of everything we nearly lost." Her words clung to me long after she went to bed. I sat in that room, gazing at the painting, remembering the night I stood in her penthouse and tucked the envelope with the check, the one meant as her wedding gift, the one I had planned for years, back into my purse. At that moment, I thought I had lost my daughter forever. But sometimes losing something makes room to gain more than you imagined. And now, here we were, mother and daughter, scarred but not broken, starting again in a home built not by inheritance, but by humility. The seasons kept turning. Vanessa found work with a local nonprofit specializing in financial literacy. She used her story as a cautionary tale, speaking softly but firmly to rooms full of young people. Pride and greed don't just steal money, they steal family. To hear her say those words out loud filled me with a quiet pride that even millions could never equal. People often approached her afterwards, hugging her, thanking her for speaking candidly about mistakes they too had made. One woman whispered, "You're lucky to still have your mother." Vanessa's eyes would always find me in the crowd then, brimming with tears. One evening, she asked if I would join her on stage at an event. At first, I resisted. Public speaking had never been my dream. But when she said, "It's important they hear from the woman who never gave up on me," I couldn't refuse. The hall was packed, cameras flashing, microphones poised. Vanessa told her story: inheritance, greed, Kevin, downfall. Then she gestured for me. My legs trembled as I stood, but when I looked out into the sea of faces, my nerves dissolved. "I am Margaret Lewis," I said softly into the microphone. "I am many things: a widow, a mother, a grandmother someday perhaps. But most of all, I am proof that sometimes love isn't soft. Sometimes love is standing firm when the person you love is making choices that break you. My daughter received $33 million and thought she no longer needed her mother. 3 days later, she was broken, begging me for help. And I helped. Not because I forgot her betrayal, but because I remembered the child she once was. And I believed she still lived beneath the greed. I was right. She came back. The room hushed. I felt decades of pain and endurance flowing from me in those words. And then applause rose, thunderous, long, unyielding. Vanessa squeezed my hand, tears streaming down her cheeks. Afterwards, as we drove home, she whispered, "You've always been the strong one, Mom. Stronger than the world ever gave you credit for." I smiled faintly. Sometimes strength is simply endurance, dressed in silence. The years will continue to test us, I know. Money still waits like a sly snake, ready to poison if we let it. But I also know that Vanessa has changed. She lost millions, but gained perspective. She threw me out, but learned who her true foundation was. And I gained the peace of knowing that no betrayal, no amount of wealth or arrogance, could erase the bond forged in all those nights rocking a feverish child, braiding her hair before school, kissing her forehead through tears. Now, when I sit before a canvas in my little studio, I paint not shadows but light. Fields, skies, open spaces where the future stretches wide. My brush no longer trembles, because my hand has steadied with the truth. I survived humiliation, rejection, and loss. And I rose stronger. Sometimes I paint us together. Vanessa smiling, her eyes soft, laughter genuine. Other times, I paint Richard, watching over us, proud. Each stroke is a reminder that justice is not always about courts or frozen accounts. Justice is a life rebuilt with dignity. And when Vanessa stands beside me at community events, when she tells rooms full of women not to let pride to blind them, when she clasps my hand as though anchoring herself, I know we are both free. So yes, my daughter got $33 million and told me I was no longer needed. She cast me out of her golden palace, calling me a burden. And 3 days later, the same daughter sat with tears streaming down her face, begging me to save her. I did, but not with money. With love made of iron, with patience weathered by years, with a spine she had never realized I carried. Now, when people ask me what I received from all that heartache, I smile. I didn't get 33 million. I got something far rarer. My daughter back, wiser, grateful, humble. And finally, the respect I had always deserved. Sometimes, the sweetest revenge isn't payback. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is watching the arrogant crumble, the greedy exposed, and the lost come home, head bowed, grateful that the person they tossed aside was strong enough to remain. And I sit in the kitchen of my daughter's modest home, cinnamon rolls cooling on the counter, paint drying on a nearby canvas, and I remind myself every single night, love, respect, and dignity. These are treasures that no man can steal, no greed can destroy, and no betrayal can erase. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.